Hello and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. Today's film, we watched Double Indemnity, directed by Billy Wilder, starring Fred McMurray and Barbara Stanwyck. My name is Cameron Tuttle, and I'm joined with Isaac Ransom. Isaac, how are you doing? How was your break and recording with Juzo? I did listen to the podcast, by the way.
Good. Yeah, it was good. We had a good conversation around the film that he chose. I'm glad we're out of French February, but yeah, it was an interesting choice. I think I was maybe a little hard on the film, and I was glad that he brought a different perspective. And we had an interesting conversation that last episode, just talking about, like, I guess kind of the viewer experience and what, like, actually hooks you in, because there are moments where movies are kind of stalling and then they really draw you in, and so we barely touched on that. I'm sure that's something we're going to talk about more in the future, but just thank you, Juzo, for coming on the show. That was a huge help for Cameron and I. We both kind of took a week off, just separately, and hopefully as a listener it was still a good experience overall, but I'm glad to be back. You read the cast of this movie, and, like, it doesn't make any sense just because I don't know anything about old famous people. But I thought, like, Barbara Streisand was in this movie.
No.
Because, like, I read it wrong. I guess it's just my dyslexic nature or something like that. But when the movie started, I was like, so wait, where's Barbara Streisand? I can't quite figure it out yet. And then I pretty much halfway through, I was like, okay, I don't think she's in this. And I think this movie is a little old for her too. Like, I was straight up looking up her age, and I was like, I don't think this adds up. She would be like...
like 4 or something,
-4 or something. No, I don't know. Yeah, but yeah.
Barbara Stanwyck. It's kind of funny because Streisand obviously had a kind of a role in the 70s as not so much a femme fatale, I guess, but she played a similar role as maybe some of the female actresses that we'll talk about in the future in these upcoming weeks. So that'll be fun. I had a great little rest. I did you not know where I was going, actually?
I didn't know till we were texting about something. You said you were up in Tahoe or something like that.
Yeah. I was up in Tahoe, just having a good time. It was a relaxing little trip. There was snow, lots of it. It snowed while we were there, but yeah, overall it was pretty good. It was nice and restful, which is.
But just for context, because I was talking to Juzo about your New Mexico trip in high school. Do you remember talking to me about that?
Yeah, I was probably what I was doing in New Mexico, I was not selling drugs, obviously. I was backpacking for 2 weeks, and I didn't have a phone because obviously there wasn't service.
I don't know why I was so uptight about it.
I don't know. I think I probably strange. I wanted to trick you. You know?
Well, it worked. And I hold this grudge against you for the day. But now whenever you say you're going on vacation, I'm like, better not be New Mexico. Not again.
How are you? How was your little break?
It was fine. I don't even remember why I had to take a break. I think it was something like I was just overloaded with work that week. So it wasn't much of a break, but I mean, I had confidence that you and Juzo would cover it great, and I appreciate him stepping in to help out. Juzo's a good voice in discussing film and stuff. He brings a different perspective. I know that I talked to Tim about the last few episodes, and he enjoyed them. So, yeah. Overall was really good. But I just had to catch up on some stuff. There was, like, this project I had to do at work that was dabbling in animation. I've never done anything animated related.
That's hard.
Yeah, so it really snuck up on me. The amount of crunch I had to do that week was crazy. But it was like basically animating like this hand-drawn like whiteboard explanation thing. But I became pretty meticulous in it and like making the hand like really follow like every edge. And I actually got to work with this like animator who worked for Nickelodeon for a while. He had his own show. But he did just rough sketches for this like church video project thing. And so it was cool to see his perspective and kind of like when I told him I was like 2 weeks in advance, I was like, hey, I need these drawings. And he was like, I'm just going to let you know, man, like you're behind. And I was like, well, what can I do? Like, you know, I got other stuff to do in my job. I'm not an animator, but he was so right. So yeah, again, just appreciate Juzo and him helping out and all that stuff. Cameron, what have you been watching lately?
Yeah, well, I've just been catching up on old TV shows, honestly. I've been rewatching Better Call Saul, and so I'm on the third season of that. I finished Breaking Bad a little while ago, and then I decided to catch back up on Better Call Saul. I also hadn't seen the fourth season, so I'm kind of gearing up for that, and hopefully the fifth season drops on Netflix soon. But and then me and Kiana have been watching House of Cards, which has been fun. The first 3 seasons are just really excellent, and everything after that is terrible. It's so bad. So I'm excited to see like where it kind of falls off. But yeah, I mean, genuinely, the first 3 seasons are so good. So
yeah, I haven't been watching too much. I was telling Juzo that I have been watching WandaVision. I haven't watched the latest episode at the time we're airing this, but it's been entertaining. And I finished the Dark Knight trilogy with Glenn. We watched The Dark Knight Rises, which I just think that movie is so silly fun. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, it really doesn't make sense most of the time. And when Bane speaks, it's comical to me, but I love it. I don't know. Like, it's just one of those movies that just got charmed for me. I'm not sure why. And it looks gorgeous, dude. The movie is gorgeous looking. So
it's so funny because I think that's exactly Juzo's argument. And he's like, I've seen that movie more than basically any other of the Batman movies, and it's basically because it's so fun. You know, like there's no other reasons.
It's pretty stupid. But I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was good. And it's not a terrible movie. It's by all means like a very good movie.
Is it better than Tenet? What do you think?
I think so. Cuz to me Tenet was more confusing. At least this movie was more like you could kind of follow the plot even if you weren't fully there. And if you're like super deep into the trilogy, like there's a lot of cool callbacks as a finale film. It doesn't feel like grandiose in the way that an Avengers ending trilogy would be, right? But it has this extremely weird spin for a superhero movie where it's like just domestic terrorism. Like it's like such
it's
like,
true, yeah.
Early 2010 kind of movie, you know, where like I don't know, everything was just in that like Call of Duty Modern Combat style, and it's just weird. It's a weird mix of stuff. So
it is a weird movie. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, anyways, I can't remember what else I've been watching. My girlfriend's been watching this TV show called Schitt's Creek, and it's just like uncomfortably funny is the best way of putting it.
It's funny. I enjoy it. Yeah.
But it's enjoyable. So we've been watching that here and there, and I can't think if we've really been watching any other movies that stand out to me. I mean, most of the time, like the movie I watch a week relates to this podcast. Although I did watch Empire with Glenn, and by the time you're hearing this, the commentary track is live for our Patreons. Still unsure if I'm going to post that to live feeds. It is not a full commentary track through the entire movie, probably because we started recording at like 10:30, and that was just a little late. But I think you'll find, like, if you don't like commentary tracks, like, it's a pretty packed episode. Like, we don't really stop talking. It's basically just a bonus podcast is kind of how it comes across. Just, I would recommend listening to it with a little bit of movie audio, because we post both, one with movie audio, one without. And Glenn is basically just breaking apart the score. So if you're interested in that, that is February's commentary track. You can check that out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Just for $1, get access to all our commentary tracks. And yes, we ship them with movie audio and no movie audio. I guess just because that kind of worked as a segue, you can also give us a rating on iTunes. If you want to support us, you don't have a few dollars. Tell friends and family. That's how the show grows. I don't know, Cameron, anything else you want to add in terms of where the podcast is going or anything like that?
Yeah, well, this month, I mean, I guess we'll just get right into it. This month is going to be centered around Billy Wilder, for no other reason than I wanted to. So, yeah, that's what this month is going to be. There's 5 weeks too, so we can kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive. And yeah, I think. Personally, I really love Billy Wilder. I think he's a really interesting filmmaker, one that really shaped the landscape of American films, shaped the landscape of what a Hollywood blockbuster would be, what's kind of a subversive comedy would be, what a noir film, as we're going to discuss this week, would be. And yeah, so I think he's a really important director. And one that is often overlooked in terms of, favorites and, bests of an era and whatnot. So, yeah, so that's what this month is going to be about. We'll announce the commentary track, but I think I have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be. And as for the vote, I think there could be some interesting ones, maybe some sleeper hits. I've seen like a lot of Billy Wilder's movies, so I kind of have a general picture of what we're gonna do this month. But yeah, it would be interesting to throw in ones that I haven't seen or haven't seen fully. So yeah, any thoughts about that? We have watched a Wilder movie before, and you did like it, so.
I don't even remember what it was. Honestly, I was like, I don't even know who Billy Wilder is, and I'm watching.
Yeah, it was Sunset Boulevard.
Oh, that was the movie I was thinking of the whole time. So yeah, exactly. I guess that makes sense. I really enjoyed that movie, and we'll probably talk about that film a lot as we discuss this one as well, because that was the main, I guess, sort of feeling in terms of structure that this one related to. And obviously, I think people know Sunset Boulevard more than this film that we're talking about.
But sort of, yeah. I think it's important, I guess, to qualify that this movie is a bit earlier than. So it came out in 1944, which is 6 years earlier than Sunset Boulevard. It's similar in his style. Like Wilder, this is like his third feature, although he wrote a bunch in the 1930s as well. He worked a lot with Ernst Lubitsch and a bunch of other directors that were at the time. But really, he was more. He started to become a writer director in the 40s, right? And this was his big breakout movie, basically. It's not his first feature, but it's definitely one of his most. It's definitely his most well renowned in his like early time period. And then after Sunset Boulevard, he had just a run of movies that were like big hits in the 60s, and then kind of got shafted in this after the 60s by Hollywood, and very disillusioned. So, yeah, he's an interesting guy. I'd like to talk more about him, but with introducing this movie, it's important to note that this is. Well, obviously, this was filming during World War II, as well as this was a noir film, and it was one of the. It wasn't one of the first, but it was really one of the pioneers of noir. So when you're talking about a film, when you're talking about like general audiences, sure, maybe Sunset Boulevard might be a little bit more famous, especially that last sequence. People have seen it. But when you're talking specifically about noir films, this is like one of the ones that people go to, one of the ones that people think of. And it'll be funny because we'll probably talk about some tropes and some interesting things that this movie does. But it was really like the pioneer of those tropes, essentially. So, important thing to think about as we're talking about this discussion. But yes, yeah, I would say Sunset Boulevard is probably more famous.
I think probably the name alone, right? I'm pretty casual when hearing about some of these movies, and it kind of scratched something inside my brain where I was like, maybe I've heard of this. It sounds like a movie with bad audio, like that's what I always think of with old movies is like that like borderline peaking where people walk in. Because honestly, when you watch these old black and white films, whenever someone's talking quietly with like a low voice, there's like something like chicken noodle soup where it's like really warm and you're like, boy, like movies just don't have that kind of style. But then as soon as they walk in, they're like, hey, Bobby, it's like, oh my goodness, like, wow, my ears, like that's just, I don't know. That's me complaining.
Also thinking about it though, this was only about 10 years after the invention of film sound. So
yeah.
If you think about it that way, I think this movie sounds pretty good. Then I don't know. I know what you mean, and there's like obviously a background noise, and there's obviously some crunch when it gets to the high ends. But for the most part, I think this movie does a pretty good job. Especially, I think the score is really good too.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it was like taken away from the experience. It was more of me just being an impatient or, less forgiving audience member, I guess is maybe the best way of putting it. I just when you hear old movies like this, as someone like myself that watches movies, you're like, oh boy, like I don't know, it's something about the sound that doesn't draw me in, but luckily the film did leave a pretty good impact, Cameron, and I guess I can sort of just go into my thoughts about it now.
Yeah, let's do it.
I felt like this movie had a very slow start, and it was pretty hard for me to get through at the beginning. But the writing really comes forward towards the middle of the film. And as these characters are like slowly fleshed out and shown throughout the movie, like this film like does a great job at setting up a plot that is familiar, maybe in the modern view, but well executed just all around. Like there's some good, dirty chunks of drama in there. So I watched this movie with my girlfriend who approaches films in a different way than I do. Like for me, it's like I'm trying to be convinced by it, and for her, she's not convinced and she doesn't want to be, right? And so sitting next to her, she's like, I'm bored, I don't really want to watch this, right? Halfway through the film, I'm like, okay, but are you sort of getting what's going on, right? Like I'm trying to explain it to her, and she's like, okay, like this is kind of interesting. Okay, I can kind of get into this. And then it starts to move forward as you start to reveal these small little details. Now you're getting bought into the crime that's taking place in the movie, and this tension's building, and even the stylistic opening of how the movie's set up. You're confused as an audience member, but then you really start to lean in and be like, oh, I kind of see what's going on here. Like that's the end of the road for him, and he's really recalling what went wrong. And so you're kind of tense waiting to see like, when is it going to snag? Like when they're starting to be let off the hook a little bit, you're like, yeah, but there's no way it's going to stay going that way. And so I really got invested. It took about halfway for this movie to get fully like bought into it. And I think that's its biggest weakness. But overall, besides maybe being a little bit familiar and I'm not surprised by the plot, like it's really the way the characters are set up and the drama surrounding them that makes this movie shine. And so just as someone who's casually watching films, doesn't know a lot about it, I was surprised that it could catch me so late in its runtime, and I found myself enjoying it towards the end for sure. So
totally, yeah. I think you said a similar thing about Sunset Boulevard as well, didn't you? You said it was slow during the beginning, and then it sort of picked up during the back half. And honestly, I kind of think that's a little bit how movies were paced more in this time period. Like I think that's I would say that's very common to find a movie where it's like, yeah, it's kind of slow going in the beginning, and then by the time it's at the end, you're like really hooked by it. I find that to be really very common, especially going back and looking at movies in 30s, 40s, 50s. Like that's totally like accurate.
Yeah. So just to confirm, Sunset Boulevard was after this film, right?
Yes, it was 1950. Yeah.
So I think what really differentiated Sunset Boulevard from this one is that there's this unordinary presentation. And obviously, like, it's more of a refined work for Wilder, right? But there's like all the weird stuff with the house that even if I
yeah.
was a little bored, right? I was constantly like, why is there a monkey in a coffin? Like, why is there all this exciting stuff that's happening that I don't really understand, but at least I'm kind of like interested. You know, I have that hook. Whereas this film, the opening should have been the hook, but I was more, and probably a viewer issue. I was like, wait, what's happening again? Like, what is going on? You know, it doesn't. It begins and it's like, well, I'm an insurance guy and I do insurance. I'm like, okay, like whatever. Like, I'm not quite sure what's exactly happening as he's giving an account on like this audio memoir thing. But as the movie continued, I was like, okay, I'm kind of seeing like where this is going, and then the good stuff starts to come out with it.
Yeah, definitely. I would say this is a fun. Well, I don't know. I think Sunset Boulevard has much more of the like atmosphere and the like intrigue behind the character and the house and whatever. I think you're totally right. Although I think this movie is a little bit less. It's kind of a little bit more popcorny and schlocky, and probably by design, I would say. Especially, you know, considering film noir as I guess maybe I should define what a film noir is, right? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's kind of a difficult genre. It oftentimes, you know, so classically a noir was usually from probably about 1930 to 1948 was the type. It was the sort of big classical era of noir. And one of the defining characteristics, obviously, was the style of it. So it was, you know, high key lighting, lots of shadows and bright, you know, window lights. You see it when he first walks in the house with Barbara Stanwyck, and there's sort of the blinds that are shooting like lights on him. So part of it is the style of it, and then another part is usually there's some type of investigator or you know, detective, or in this case it's an insurance person, but usually there's someone who's trying to either uncover a mystery or gets wrapped up in a crime because of a femme fatale. So usually the big hook of this genre is that there's a guy looking into something who's sort of either swindled or kind of swept off his feet from this femme fatale character. And honestly, this movie was a big pioneer in what the femme fatale would be, and sort of what it might look like on screen, or what it best looks like on screen. So is that a little more helpful, or do you still feel like it's confusing? It's a confusing genre. It's hard to tell. Like, it's hard to pin down exactly what is a noir. But
yeah, I think I find like your technical notes on what is usually shown in a noir film to be sort of insightful, I guess. Because like just now I looked up what the best noir films were on Google, and I don't even know how some of these are considered noir films. I mean, The Dark Knight is on here. Like, is that what?
No.
Like, I don't know. I understand how that is. But there are other films like, what was it? Blade Runner is on.
Yeah, Blade Runner would be a noir, technically. It would be like a neo-noir.
Right. So what's the difference between like neo-noir and noir? What is that? Like,
well, neo-noir is like, it's modern, basically, and it doesn't have to have some of the trappings. So like, yeah, the original Blade Runner would definitely count, specifically because like stylistically it's very similar, and it takes very much from original noirs. And there's also, you know, he's kind of an investigator, although in an unofficial capacity, right? He's like looking for or no, I guess he does have an official role. He's looking for these sentient robots. Yeah. And then there's also the femme fatale as well. So yeah, it has the mainstays of noir.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a more modern choice, but it's interesting that it's in that futuristic setting. I think when I think of Noir, I think of like the detective hats, the spotlight, and the rainy street, right? That kind of style, and maybe a little bit of jazz too. Which I don't know if the score of this film has. Does it have? It kind of has like big band, not big band, but orchestra, like just orchestral pieces, right?
Yeah, it's much more of like a classical 40s score. I now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure who the sort of jazz Noir. I know that's definitely like a trope for sure. The walking into a bar and it's rainy and then the jazz or whatever. Yeah, that's totally a trope in Noir, but I'm not sure which film that would have come from. It's definitely not this one, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's cool. I mean, so you would consider this to be one of the major defining aspects of what that genre is now today.
Totally, yeah. It's this movie, The Maltese Falcon, and those are like kind of the two big ones, honestly. You almost don't need to talk about many others. There's some that are like on the edge of noir, but yeah, those two, this movie and The Maltese Falcon. I would say The Third Man is kind of on the edge, but yeah.
So how many times have you watched this movie, Cameron?
This is my second time watching this movie. I watched it in class the first time. I took a whole class on Billy Wilder, so that's why we can get deep into it if we want to. But yeah, so I mean, for me, I found the beginning hook very interesting as a little bit of a when you're following someone who's investigating something, or you're following a detective, a lot of times, obviously, you have you're introduced to the person and they go through and they find the clues, and there's a red herring, or they think that it's someone and then it's actually someone else. But at the beginning of this movie, when you think that you're going to get the question, you actually get the answer to the question. And what you watch throughout the entire movie is the question, basically. And I find that really interesting in terms of how the plot is set up. Now, obviously, that's become sort of a classic movie trope, sort of giving the twist away at the end and then actually having it be something else, or giving the twist away at the beginning and having it be something else at the end. That's become sort of a main trope in these kinds of movies nowadays. But I would say that this movie, as a pioneer of that, is really, really effective. There's not even a whole lot of misdirection. You don't even get the sort of major twist being something different at the end. Really, the major twist in the climax. And I guess, are we spoiling it? Is that fine?
I mean, it's a little bit of an old film, so
sure.
I
guess
it,
I guess. Although I would recommend watching it. Also, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's you're not going to spoil it that much. But the twist in the end is that she's been doing this like all of her time, essentially. The moment for me that is kind of always the big reveal is when he's talking to the daughter, and she says she basically tells the whole story of how her mom died,
right.
And I find that so interesting because it really, as a twist, it's not that important, right? It doesn't change the trajectory of the characters at all. But as a dramatic character piece, and as sort of, if we're thinking about her as the villain or the antagonist of this story, it really puts all of her actions into a new light. And it's very, very interesting how that reflects back on the rest of the movie, I would say. So for me, I think you're right in saying that like the drama and the characters are really what are strong in this movie, and really kind of what make you hooked into the film. It's not really the story. It's really much more the drama and what goes on between the characters.
Yeah, so I think we should talk a little bit about each character and sort of how they stand out on their own, and how they like kind of weave through the plot. And I guess we can start with Walter Neff as the narrator. He really is sort of flat, but like, yeah, it's interesting. Like, he's just giving his perspective and account of it, but he doesn't have a lot of charisma around him, I guess. I don't know. Like, I wasn't overly convinced by his romance. And I think that was probably just the times, like, where he's like, shut up, baby, kiss me. You know, I'm like, all right, come on, you know. But he's a great narrator in showing sort of like how he was feeling and what they were doing and things like that. And he serves more as like a plot device, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, you know, you look at Phyllis, what's her name? Dickerson or something? Dietrichson. Yeah. She is sort of the mysterious figure in the movie where you're like, I'm not 100% sure like what angle she's playing all the time, right? And at first you're just convinced that she has a bad life, and so she's like, I just want to get rid of my husband, which is like, oh, okay, that's weird, you know. And even her first, like, there's like this small crack in the glass when she first kind of slowly puts that idea up to ponder with Neff, right? And so like you're a little worried, but she can kind of mask that, her unhinged nature, with, I guess, her being like a sob story or a sad person. She's a little manipulative, and as the strings are slowly tied off with the crime, and Keys is beginning to kind of put the pieces together, right? You start to see her become more and more like a maniac a little bit, and that's a fun thing to watch as a viewer, I guess. As like it's like you are starting to figure out really like who she is, and that's more entertaining because you already know what happened. You don't care about Keys finding out what happened because you already know what happened, right? Instead, you're more interested in like the characters, specifically her character, like seeing her true colors, right? If that makes sense. But actually, my favorite character was Keys, the detective.
Totally.
He is just so fun, and he's the one that had like the most character the charisma in the movie. The fact that he can never find like a light for his cigarette is like such a fun interaction between him and Neff, and it brings their friendship to like a deeper level just through like a small action. Like you're really convinced by that, and he's got a lot of just it's weird. I think like when you think about these like crime movies where something bad happens, and it's like it's opposite to this. Like usually I guess the good character is I don't know how to put it. It's like the good character is put center stage, and they're scrambling to figure out what happened is like the heart of it, right? Where this film, it's almost like Keys is the villain, but he's the good guy. Does that make sense? Like in terms of like a structural level.
He's the antagonist, but he's actually doing the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And but you like him for that, right? Like you like him for that, whereas like I've seen films before where the antagonist is entertaining to watch, but you never really get behind him, but you could see where he's coming from, right? Like some great like superhero villains like the Joker and things like that. Like you're totally bought into their kind of wild structure as a character, right? Keys plays that role, but as a good guy, you know, like it's I mean, maybe you can compare it to like someone like I don't know, like I because I'm trying to think of like technically good characters that are up against like bad, and I don't know why I'm thinking about Pirates of the Caribbean, right? Because they're pirates. Like pirates are bad, and the good guys should be good, but they're not sympathetic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, totodally.
The British are just terrible people. They're just as bad as the pirates, right?
What's the guy's name? The British like commander or whatever.
I don't
like hate.
Yeah, that guy. I love that guy's performance in Dead Man's Chest, the second movie, where he's like just the drunken, like failed
he's the washed
captain.
up,
Yeah, that's always fun. But like it's interesting to see a antagonist that you root for because they're actually good. Like, I don't know, I can't really think of another movie that does that, and I found that really fun as a way to like, sort of put your characters together, I guess. I didn't. Definitely. I don't know, Cameron. Can you think of another movie that's like that? I'm really sort of pressed to think of one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Maybe I don't know. I'd have to think about it. It would definitely have to be like where your main characters are criminals, obviously, and the person who's trying to, is the detective or whatever else. Yeah, but usually they make them kind of very unlikable.
Right.
Is usually what it is. But
I think it's a great idea, like for people making movies about bad people that are, because like we've seen so many anti-heroes, right? And that's always been hot, like, because they're doing the thing that nobody's supposed to do, but somehow there's an ounce of humanity in them that you can like get behind, and that whole moral relativism is exciting as a watcher. But like to see their antagonist be just as sympathetic or likable, I love that idea. I love the idea of like seeing that kind of pan out, and maybe even like a modern approach of like having this good friendship and see the drama flesh out more. Like I was like, I'm totally attracted to that structure.
Totally. And I think what's really interesting about that interaction is that they really are genuine friends, and you kind of get that, or at the very least, genuine, like they like each other and they look out for each other, in their normal lives. And so to see that kind of crumble with this really toxic love angle, it's actually kind of affecting when you see later on that he, Keyes has he calls off the dogs basically on Neff's character at one point. Neff goes into his office, remember, and he says like, he listens to the tape essentially about how Keyes is totally, an upstanding guy and blah, blah, blah. And then eventually, you see him put it together more and more. And by the end, Keyes is like totally facing his betrayal, essentially, and that's what makes the sort of last shot where he's dying on the steps and Keyes gives him the match. That's what makes it so effective. It's
dude, that's like the best
awesome
way to tie and then when the movie ended, I was like, thank goodness they ended it, because that's like the best way to end it.
Totally.
Like there's no other way that you needed to do it. So
totally. And it's so like perfect too. It's like it's a perfect way to end that story. And it's also, the conclusion between the love angle, like that was already finished by the time, the end of the story came, or the beginning of the movie came around, essentially. You see her, she shoots him, and then she runs and she says, I couldn't shoot you a second time. That means I'm really in love. And, and it's like, okay, yeah. And then she does get what she deserves. She, Neff kills her.
That's like, but like as a viewer, that was a moment where I was like, no, like just shoot her. And then he does. And I was like, oh snap, he shot her, like,
yeah, exactly.
Like that was like one of those moments that, like the conclusion of this film pays off if you're able to sit through the beginning. And I think that's why I'm more positive on it, because if I had given up, which, I wasn't going to, obviously, like I was going to finish it all the way through, but like people do kind of turn movies off after a while, like this movie does have the good stuff at the end. Right. So yeah, overall, like I thought the conclusion was super satisfying when you're bought in for the beginning, or for at least halfway, right?
Yeah. And one other thing that I would like to mention too is this movie came out not only in the middle of World War II, right, which was kind of a big deal. It's really hard to make a movie during a war like this. They made obviously some incredible movies during this time, but also like I can imagine it would be really difficult to do. But and also, one thing to mention about that, it's not entirely related, but I think it's important, is Billy Wilder actually he was from Austria, and he fled the country in 1933 when Hitler came to power. So he was sort of directly affected during this time, and it was he goes on to make a couple movies about World War II that are very interesting in terms of their take, but they're not super serious. And he wanted to direct Schindler's List, actually. But he didn't end up getting the chance to. But yeah, I mean, in any case, that's not super relevant. But
well, I'd like to hear more about Wilder, but I think we should finish up our thoughts kind of on the rest of the movie. I don't know how much more there's to talk about in terms of production. I just want to tie a bow on the characters, because I think Mr. Ditcherson, I don't know how to say his name, and I think Nino as well. Like they serve their roles as like two note characters. Like they're just supporting roles, but they kind of like are full of life, and to give those side characters that much energy is, I think, one of the things that makes dramas. They're believable,
Totally.
They're exciting, they're fun to watch on screen, and they don't overstay their welcome. And then I think Lola is kind of that wild card or the MacGuffin in the structure of it. And the only reason I'm really going in depth on the characters is because I don't really think there's anything else about this movie. I mean, maybe you could talk about like set design, but the plot is exciting because of the drama of the characters, because the characters are executed so well. Cameron, what do you think of Lola? I think she just serves as like that final reveal. I didn't really find her too interesting till that moment, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think Lola is interesting because I think in a longer movie she probably would have been more fleshed out, although I'm glad that she wasn't in some ways. I think for me, she is totally the opposite, like archetypally, from Phyllis, right? So she is sort of the young, very sincere, very innocent version of sort of the beautiful Phyllis, essentially. And I think she's important as a character in that role, right? She's not super well fleshed out. She's important as the sort of foil for the femme fatale, I would say. So I think she plays it really well, and I think the end reveal is really where she steps up to be very important as a character.
I think that pretty much ties up all the characters, but they do deserve the spotlight in this movie because they carry it forward. And they let the drama sink in a powerful way. Cameron, do you want to talk about anything production-wise or any notes? I know we want to kind of get into Wilder. I want to hear a little bit of background on who Billy Wilder is. I know you were talking about where he came from and whatnot, but if you have any more on that.
Yeah,
let's talk about the movie first.
Well, yeah, I want to say just this movie was made during the Haze Code, which was kind of an important force on noir films, especially, but especially Wilder's career. I would say he was one who was pioneering sort of the edge of what the Haze Code would allow. He was really one to push the boundaries in that way.
Those ankles,
those
ankles.
As we'll see in some of his other movies, he has some pretty racy ideas, I would say. Some pretty interesting ways that he goes about like slipping things in, I guess. And for me, about the Haze Code, right?
Yeah, you mentioned it before, but I guess for the listeners who maybe don't remember, do you want to give like a quick overview?
Yeah, so the Haze Code was basically like the MPAA. They rate movies now, but essentially it was a very restrictive a very restrictive version of the MPAA. So it was either approved or not approved. And if you weren't approved, you wouldn't be able to get wide released in theaters. So, for approved movies, you had to do, there's basically a big list of things you couldn't show. For example, I have it brought up here, but for example, illegal traffic in drugs, any inference of sex perversion, so there's like things that are no's, essentially, swearing, obviously, and licentious or suggestive nudity, things like that. So it was a restrictive code around what was allowed to be shown in movies. And part of it, obviously, was a voluntary system, but it was also brought upon through, risk of censorship by the government and lobbying through different organizations. So the code was very important in this time because it was really what was guiding. It's a lot more involved than some of the ratings board is right now, right? You can't show bad guys getting away with bad things was one of the code elements. You can't show if there's a criminal element in your movie, they had to get justice, essentially. And that was really important to the noir genre, because how do you show a movie and be surprising about where it's going to go if you know that the good guys are going to succeed in the end, essentially. And so Wilder in this movie, what I find so interesting is he finds a way to get around that by telling you up front what's happening and allowing the bad guys, or allowing the good guys to succeed, but also not making it necessarily satisfying that they do, right? He gives it, it's not this hurrah moment at the end of, Keyes figuring it out and he goes to the police and, they arrest him. It's not at all. It's totally a somber moment. It's a betrayal, and it's also, this deep friendship crumbling. The femme fatale, she gets her ending. She gets stopped, she gets justice, but not because of because of the law, but because of her actions towards our, the main character. So I find it a really interesting way of getting around some of these loopholes. And also, not to mention, there's definitely innuendo in this movie. There's totally, he makes jokes the first time he comes over to the house, and other things like that. He's skirting the boundaries, I would say, Wilder is. And I find it really interesting to analyze on that level, as well as sort of the character analysis too. I think is really important. But
one of the things that really stuck with me in the film was how serious it took the act of the crime, or even the morality of the crime, once it had been executed. Right, he gets home to his apartment, right. And Walter Neff is talking about how it's like everything went right. There was no calls, there was nobody knocked on the door, and then he has that the moment where he's walking down the street and he's like, I just knew, that was the moment where I knew it wasn't going to go right, and it was something sinking in. It was like this feeling, right? And I don't know, that moment was super serious. I don't know how it was executed in a way, but hearing about Haze Code and all that, right? I don't know how this movie isn't glorifying any sort of criminal action. Instead, it's really diving deep and condemning it in a more powerful way than if it was never shown. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's what's so effective, and probably why the movie got passed. I don't know how scrutinized it was at the time, but it's it's done really well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I can give just a little bit of background. I guess, honestly, I kind of said what I wanted to say in this movie. We'll go into more of his story along the way. But yeah, he was born in Austria. He came over after Hitler's rise to power. He was, he kind of moved around a lot when he was younger. His father, I believe, either worked on the train line or he was sort of in trains coming up, and so he lived in Vienna for a while. He lived in other places. He lived in Germany, and so he was kind of a well-traveled person, and he was of Jewish descent. So he, obviously it was affecting him once Adolf Hitler came to power. So yeah, he came over. The other thing that I wanted to mention in this that we'll get into more next week, I think, is he always wrote with a partner. He never wrote by himself. And so, so he had a long-standing relationship with Charles Brackett, who's his kind of main person that he wrote with for the first half of his career. Although, for this movie, he actually wrote with Raymond Chandler, who he didn't really work with that much, but yeah. And then at the end of his career, he worked a lot with IAL Diamond, and those were kind of his two big people that he wrote with, essentially. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of it. He, this was his big movie at the time. This is like him introducing himself as a director. So
I think it's so cool that I didn't realize that he was the director of Sunset Boulevard, right? Because I could already feel that similarity between the two films. And it's cool that he wrote them both too, because the characters both shine in both movies. So pretty impressed how it hooked me back in, and sort of going off the conversation that I was having with Juzo last episode, like that I don't know if this movie serves as an example of how the movie kind of hooked me, because I wasn't hooked for a long time until the dirt of the drama was coming up and the characters were fleshed in a experience that was like convincing. You know what I mean? Like when it all starts to go down and they begin to like, I would say it's after the part where she shows up at his apartment with the hat. Like he's like, you know what? I think I'm in it. Like I'm gonna plan this. Like this was a part of my, like this has kind of been tinkering into my head. He says those things about like thinking how you could do it better than the crooks because you study the crooks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's where I was like, oh, this train's moving. You know, no pun intended, right? I was like, okay, like I'm in it. You know, and I'm feeling hooked, and it's kind of like that. Those cool moments in movies where they're doing the big setup and then, for lack of a better term, like the heist or the big, operation goes down. And yeah, like I think that's where the movie picks up steam, and it didn't disappoint in the end. Like the writing came through super strong. All the boring parts that they're setting up at the beginning were still memorable halfway through, and they came forward louder than the beginning, right? Because you see Walter light Keyes's cigarette like multiple times, and that happens at the beginning, but then it happens in the middle, and it happens at the end, and it happens at the end. And for someone who's dumb like myself, I was like, I got it, I got it. They made that one thing stick out and continue to stick out throughout all of it. So
totally.
Yeah.
And that honestly, that's just good writing too. That's when you have something that sets up that you don't get at the beginning or you don't pay attention to at the beginning, and it comes back in full force at the end. That's good writing,
Yeah, and that's how this movie shines. That's how Sunset Boulevard shines. I think you were totally right when you're saying like comparing the two. There's something about Sunset Boulevard that has a aesthetic feeling or a style that is interesting. I would say, as just subjectively, I'm more drawn to that when I watch movies. I know that's maybe not what most people are drawn to, and I guess maybe that disqualifies me as speaking as the casual, but I find more interest in that than a slow start. But you could see how his career drove up to that moment, right? I love that Wilder's a writer too. I
Totally.
didn't realize that they were together, or he was together on those two things. So, awesome first choice. I'm excited for the month now. When did he stop making movies?
So his last movie was in 1981. It was called Buddy Buddy, and it was a complete flop. It was just like an utter flop. People hated it, but I've actually never seen Buddy Buddy. I saw his movie that he did before that in '78 called Fedora. I thought that was good-ish. It was okay. It was very much a Wilder movie, but it was, you could tell like he was, I don't know. I don't want to say he lost any talent necessarily, but he definitely wasn't working very much by the end of his career.
Gotcha.
He had a couple major flops in the 60s that pushed him out of Hollywood a lot. So we'll probably, I'm thinking about what we want to do for the vote, because there's at least 3 movies that I want to hit for sure. And the other ones will kind of be up to the listeners. So I'm still pulling it together, but definitely there's some options. There's some really great movies that we're not going to hit too in this time period. You know, like Ace in the Hole is amazing. I love that movie. So funny, such a funny movie. I really liked A Foreign Affair, although I'm not sure we're going to be able to watch it. Maybe I'll put that in the vote, but yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. I think if you're digging like Wilder month, make sure to listen to our Sunset Boulevard episode 2, because that was pretty early on in this podcast, and I think that's an important film of his. I mean, just personally, like, it's weird for me to watch an old movie and like it as a casual viewer, and so I'm saying, like, my recommendation, go watch that one for sure. I think we should get into where we recommend this movie, Cameron. We rate on a whack scale of for everyone, for casuals, for curious, and for cinephiles. Where would you place it as the expert, Cameron?
For me, it's definitely for someone who's more curious than just for everybody, I guess. I don't know. I think.
Would you put it for the casuals? That's where it would be.
For you, the casuals?
Yeah, I mean, well, like, okay, like I said, our rating is a little weird, right? So if you're gonna land it, you got to justify it. And I was gonna put it right around the casual area, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're casually into watching films and you're willing to give something like a crack, or at least try it, right? I would say that this movie will satisfy you. I think is kind of like how I landed on it, because I was unsatisfied at the beginning, but it still was able to come around. So I don't think it's for everyone. I don't. And Juzo said this to me on the episode too. He's like, "What movie is for everyone?" You know, that's a good point, right? But sometimes it's easy to recommend something that could be like more universal. I think the reason I'm straying from giving it that rating is because of the slow opening.
Yeah.
But once you're past that, and you can get past your bias of watching a black and white movie, which I know for some reason, Cameron, that doesn't bother you at all. To me, I'm like, I can't. I don't know what it is. This movie you'll enjoy it. I think it's very good.
I think holding it up to be sort of, I don't know, if you like sort of interesting crime dramas, like, and you want to go back and you want to see like basically the original interesting crime drama, like, this is a great movie. You know, it's only like an hour and 45 minutes. It's totally not long. It's totally not like that hard to get into. There's not a lot of characters that you're like, you know, who do I have to remember? They're all super straightforward, super easy to understand, and it's just like, it's a good time, you know. It's just a lot of fun. So
yeah, I could see someone getting hung up on the beginning because it's slow, but I think you're right. If that's what you're looking for, if that's where you're willing to explore, because there are a lot of people that like casually enjoy movies that are like, I'm willing to watch something a little different, right? Or get a little history. Like, I think this, you don't even really need to be overly convinced or bought in or curious, right? Like, that's where I'm like, I think this movie is good enough to stand on its own. But I do agree with you. Don't go in with like expectations out the window, you know, like it is the groundwork for what a genre built around, right? Yeah. So, well said, Cameron, for sure.
Yeah, totally. Should I tell everybody what the commentary is going to be?
Do it, dude.
This is going to be such a fun one. We're going to watch Some Like It Hot, starring Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Manson. Jeez.
Oh, my.
Starring Marilyn Monroe. Yeah, it's going to be so much fun. I love this movie. It's a comedy. We'll see when we get there. You're going to think it's funny, I think. But, yeah.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to hanging out. I'm looking forward to getting back my mic stand, Cameron.
I know,
Give it back.
It's sitting on the floor over here.
I have this huge one now. I can't just put it on the desk. I'm just like, come on, man. You know, this is heavy. This is heavy. I don't want this in here all the time. So, yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up our thoughts. Again, if you're interested in the commentary track that we're going to be talking over this month, if you like what we're doing here at Cinema Spectator, check us out, patreon.com/ECFS Productions. You can get a bunch of benefits like voting on which Wilder movie we're going to be watching this month. The paying audience gets the ability to do that. So if you're interested, again, patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Be a part of that community. They are not a loud community, but they're a nice community. I'll put it that way. Come on, Patrons. You can talk to us. That's what I'll say. You can talk to us. Darren, you can message us on... I bet you Darren's like, I just never remember my sign-in email. He can't cancel his Patreon. He's like, oh, rats. But, yeah, we appreciate all you guys listening and the people that listen on free feeds as well. We post every Monday, so hopefully we'll have you join us again for another Wilder discussion. But until then, we will see you then. That was a horrible ending. I was like, where? Oh, see you. I don't see you. You're listening. You'll listen to us then.
We'll hear you. I mean, you'll hear us whenever you want, I guess.
It's the future. It's yours whenever you want it. All right. See you then. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.